Hey everybody, this is Matt.
This is Greg. We are Record Mashup. We got another great episode for you today, returning from a long while. But before we get into anything, please subscribe to us. Let your friends know. Let them subscribe to us. Catch us on anything that you have. So Apple, Google, or any other podcast service that you had. You can also check us out on Facebook. Or Facebook at Record Mashup, and email us at recordmashup@gmail.com. All right, Matt, what do we have in store this week?
We are going to do Black History Month. Now, we realize this is April, Black History Month is in February, but Greg and I have lives that went crazy, bonkers for the last 2 months. So we apologize, but you know what? Black History Month should be honored at all times. So get off our backs.
Sorry, but we're here.
Yeah. So anyway, so we're doing Black History, and we've got two really great songs today. I'm going to be doing "Change Is Going to Come" by Sam Cooke. And Greg, what do you got?
So I have All Black Everything by Lupe Fiasco, and this is a pretty lyric intensive song, not so much a song fact intensive song. So if there are any other alibis, Matt, I think we'll just get back into the swing of things.
Yeah, good to be back.
All right, so this is off of Lupe Fiasco's third album, Lasers. There's a lot of controversy around this album based on he was having issues with his record label at the time and having issues putting out this album. Some of the songs on the album he doesn't even like. He was kind of just forced into putting some of the songs on the album so that because of the record label issues that he was having, and he didn't feel he got his creative way with the album that he'd like. And if any of you are Lupe Fiasco fans and really liked his first two albums, The Cool and Lupe Fiasco's Food and Liquor, that was more what he was trying to get to, but he didn't quite get to that on this album. But one of the songs that he did get to have his creative kind of take on was All Black Everything, and he did enjoy the song and felt that it was more at his roots of the type of music that he was trying to put out. So there's a quick background on the song. And so the album came out in 2011. The song was not a single off the album, so it's just a song that I thought would fit perfect for this week. So if you haven't heard it before, go check it out. We'll break down the lyrics coming up. So
Yeah,
the chorus.
Well, I was
Yeah,
say
go
too,
ahead, Matt.
Before we get into lyrics, I like the premise of the song. It's just a complete alternate history or take on history. Almost kind of
It's
like
an
a what if.
interesting swing on things.
Yeah, just like a what if scenario. And I just think the premise of it's really cool.
Yeah. I know a lot of people had mixed reviews on the whole Lasers album, and I think this isn't my favorite song off the album, but it's up there. There's some good songs on the album, and this is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so getting into the chorus, starts off talking about that you would never know what could ever be. Talks about if people stayed in Africa and they didn't ever leave, like what would happen? Would there be no slaves in history? And then he kind of quotes Martin Luther King at this point. So he talks about, see, I fell asleep and I had a dream. It was all black, everything. So kind of quoting back to Martin Luther King's I had a dream speech, or I have a dream speech, and just saying, what if everything was different? He's not saying that for everything to be black, right? He's saying that what if things had gone differently in history, and he spells that more out in the following verses. So getting in the verse 1, he says, well, if we didn't get exploited and that we didn't work for free and we were employed. So basically he's saying, what if instead of early American settlers coming over, taking all the people by force, basically, and forcing them to work in slavery, what if they came over and like, hey, we're going to pay you to do all these jobs and you're going to have your own sense of like income and self-worth, and you'll be able to use that when you're done with the job, which is the exact opposite of slavery, being employed. So during the first 400 years, we would actually enjoy it. And then he talks about having the Constitution written by W.E. Du Bois or W.B. Du Bois. So interestingly, he was born 80 years after the Constitution was written, but it's also his alternate universe to where if things were different, could basically a black person had like some writing of the Constitution. It doesn't really matter the year frame. His idea is still the same. He's rewriting history. What if there was more diversity in the creation of the Constitution, basically? From that, there would be no civil war. There would have been no reconstructions, so there wouldn't have been anything that we would have been fighting over. Civil war possibly could have still happened, but it would not have the basis that a lot of people put on of slavery. There would be maybe it's a civil war over just something else, whatever it may be, right?
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of and you know, there's a number of reasons why the Civil Wars fought. Slavery was certainly the number one reason, but a lot of it was economic too. So certainly,
there was other things to it. Yes.
Yeah.
Then this next line, I had to kind of look it up because I didn't know what it meant. But Little Black Sambo apparently was a children's book from the late 1800s.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with this reference either. I had to look this up as well.
Yeah, but apparently it used to be, or it's used as a racial slur. So I apologize if that is something I shouldn't be saying. So I just won't say it. But he's basically saying what if that person grew up to be a lawyer, it'd be completely different story, have a completely different context to it.
Right.
Next, he kind of gets into it. There's on the newsstands, it's saying that a black woman is the leader of the Ku Klux Klan. So maybe in his story, the KKK isn't destroying of black communities and what's the word I'm looking for? Demoting their like presence as a person, but instead he's empowering like a woman basically and saying that like doesn't matter man, woman, black, white, yellow, red, blue, whatever you are, it doesn't matter. You can still provide some influence and be a positive influence.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting he specifically says a woman too. Kind of, breaks down patriarchy a little bit here too, with that decision.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, this song was written in 2011, so it's not like, it came out in 2011, so it's not like it's ahead of its time or anything like that. But I think pretty much if you're not like a white male, there's like some negative kind of like something negative to it, I guess. Not to say that like being a white male makes you perfect or anything, but there's some connotation to that. So next he gets into Malcolm X, who is Malcolm Little, and Martin Luther King, basically being old men. So instead of having the civil rights, like the civil rights active movements and everything like that back in the day, where Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were assassinated, instead they don't have to deal with that. So there's nothing that matters for them to be protesting against at that point. So they grow up to be old men and friends and having a eulogy written for each other. And then talking about Bill O'Reilly. I don't know your opinion of Bill O'Reilly. I don't like the guy. So I understand the message on this one, but basically saying like cranky old man accepting different religion essentially is what that one's getting into. So you can see from him reading the Quran.
I think it's Kurt, but I've always heard it pronounced Quran, but
Quran.
I don't know. I think it's probably one of those words, multiple pronunciations.
Yeah. And then going into President Bush saying condolences from Iran and Ahmadinejad, who was the president of Iran. winning the Mandela Peace Prize because he is not someone who would be winning that prize. But in his alternate reality, there's a lot of differences happening that kind of lead up to all these different changes in how people react and how they are perceived and things. So it's a much lighter world than the one we actually live in. So that goes back into the chorus, going back through what things were different, basically. And that gets into verse 2. So verse 2 starts off that there's no projects. So if you're not familiar with projects, they're housing projects that basically poor families have been brought up in. And depending who you talk to about it, not confirming nor denying this, but it was targeted toward young Black families, poor Black families. So he's basically saying that these would have never existed. There would have been no targeting for specific people, and these project housings would not have been built. Going further, racism has no context. So at that point, racism isn't a thing in this alternate reality, which is the whole message of the song, basically. Like, there's no racism. There's no, like, sure, there's different colored people, but no one sees that at any level. And I like this next line. So everybody rapping like crack never happened, Crips never occurred, no Bloods to attack them, and there's no hood to attack in. So rap kind of has a negative, at least definitely in the 90s, 80s, 90s, it definitely had a negative reputation to where it causes a lot of violence and things like that. And rap about drugs, and that's all it is violence and drugs, which here he is saying that everyone will be rapping. There's none of that violence and drugs connotation for rap. So everyone would kind of be into it and not have that negative perception of rap, which I think we've already proven that hip hop R&B definitely is not all of that through this podcast. And I think we've picked good songs on both sides from your perspective, Matt, and mine, that show like there's good music everywhere, even if you don't like it. Like, I don't like country music, but you picked a couple of country songs. And, hey, if those pop on, I'll listen to it.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely true.
So it's definitely good things happen. Like this next line: Somalia is a great place to relax in. I've never been to Somalia, so I can't speak firsthand, but I've heard some things.
I would say I just know about their pirates.
Yeah, I've heard some things. I don't think I'd want to go relax there, but
I do feel like this line's a little out of place too, though, because I mean, I feel like the premise of the song was about. Well, I guess this is true in other parts, but I kind of thought the premise was more about marriage.
I think it's just for the world in general. It just seems a little out of place. So okay. So I'm going to speak from a non-professional, just purely guessing at this point, but I think a lot. So Africa is obviously not a third world continent, right? Like, there's some wealthy cities and countries in Africa, so it's not like this rundown thing like Lion King world that like I've ran into some people who think it's like that. Met some people from Africa and everything. They're from a city. Cities exist there, people. But speaking from not knowing 100%, but I think a lot of issues kind of arose from slavery and a lot of people being taken from Africa, and there might have been issues. So I know this, I don't think Somalia was one of the places directly affected by it, but if you look back in history, Africa, like Egypt areas, things like that, had a lot of success through the world.
Well, I think a lot of it too is just European colonialism in general. You had England and France and Spain, and I'm sure
England's the worst of them all.
Yeah, but they were all coming down because there's a number of countries in Africa where the official language is French, because the French colonized there, and
especially northern Africa, they have a lot.
Yeah, so I think a big part of it too is just you had these European countries coming in and drawing new boundaries that maybe weren't necessarily along ethnic lines that just inherently then created conflict. But
yeah. So I think that's kind of where that line is going toward. And then the next couple of lines, it kind of gets pretty interesting. So he talks about Fred Astaire is the first to do a backspin. The Rat Pack was a cool group of black men, and they inspired 5 white guys called the Jacksons. So the Rat Pack, it was Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sinatra, and who was the last person in the Rat Pack?
it was
It was
he had Humphrey Bogart.
Dean Martin.
Yeah, Dean. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there are a bunch of white dudes in it, and then Sammy Davis Jr., who's a black guy, right? So he's kind of pointing at that, like, instead of it being them who influenced the Jackson 5, who were 5 black kids, it was a group of black men inspiring white guys. And then the next line talks about Eminem in his inspiration to 50 Cent and signing on 50 Cent. So Eminem in this could be, I've seen a couple different interpretations for his lyric because it is kind of a little unclear, but you could take it to where Eminem is black in this world of his, and he inspires a white guy named 50 Cent, or Eminem is still a white person in this dream of his, but instead of white people being like an anomaly in the rap world, I guess, because how many famous white rappers can you name?
Yeah, I kind of thought,
and he signed on 50 Cent as a white person too.
Yeah, I feel like I took it as Eminem is black.
Yeah, that's how I took it. I saw the other interpretation also online.
Yeah, because it just because then you've got the quote sounding white rapper by the name of 50 Cent.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense that everything else about the song is kind of like opposite. Yeah. So it doesn't make sense that he would just fit in something that's not opposite.
Yeah. Either way, there's inspiration on both ends, and it's just it's completely different to what we see today.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's a dream and not reality. But from there, he goes back into the chorus, and then he gets into his third verse, which is a really short verse, and it just kind of wraps everything up. So he talks that he knows it's just a fantasy, and there's nothing you can change about the past, and there's nothing that we can change back then, but there's nothing that stops us from changing the future. We can always choose to change. We can always help others make that change. And he makes a comment that every woman's a queen, every man's a king, and it doesn't matter what color you are in there. So everyone's skin color, whatever it may be, should just kind of blend together, and there should be no issues with that. So it kind of just sums up everything that he's been rapping about for the whole song. And he just says to close your eyes, it's all black everything, just basically saying black equality or whatever, however you take that. It's not saying that black is better or anything, but that there just needs to be equality between everyone. And that is pretty much the song. So there weren't any other really song facts I had other than what I talked about at the beginning, but I think that he spelled out his message pretty clearly in the song, and I thought it was well done.
Yeah, as I said, I like the premise of the song and just the idea of flipping in history on its head.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, but I didn't have anything else, Matt. I think we beat that one down pretty well.
Well, before we get into the next song, our podcast today is presented by Podgo. Podgo is the easiest way for you to monetize your podcast. So for you fellow podcasters out there, check out Podgo. They offer a flat rate for ad space, so you always know how much you get when you include an ad from them. And be sure to apply today to become a member and immediately get connected with advertisers that tailor and fit to your audience. That's podgo.co at podgo.co. Check out Podgo today. And with that, let's jump into our next song. As I said, our next song is A Change Is Gonna Come by Sam Cooke. This was a song that initially appeared on Cooke's album Ain't That Good News, which was released in mid-February of 64. It was actually released as a single in December of 64. And a lot of great history behind this song and some interesting storylines that go with it. This was a song that he wrote inspired by multiple personal events that took place in his life. If you don't know, Sam Cooke was he was actually a really big star at this point. This was the era when rock and roll was taken over, and you're starting to see the rise of Motown that's starting to happen. It's a little bit before Motown, but and Sam Cooke was a huge star as far as Black artists went, and this is really at the height of his career when this came out. And he was inspired in early 60s, 63, late 63, early 64 to write this song. As I said, by multiple personal events. And most notably, there was a situation where he and his entourage, I think it was his wife at the time, were turned away from a Holiday Inn in Shreveport, Louisiana, which was apparently a whites only motel. And Cooke actually apparently got heated with the hotel staff over this, but his entourage eventually convinced him to leave the place. And they went across town to another hotel. And by the time they arrived there, the police were already on site, and they arrested the entire group for quote unquote disturbing the peace. And the next day, the New York Times ran an article on the story, and African Americans were outraged nationwide. But that story, along with other events of 1963, including Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, and Bob Dylan actually released his song "Blowin' in the Wind" that in 1963, which helped influence Cooke in terms of writing this song. And so Cooke was quoted as saying that the lyrics and the composition of this song just came to him in a dream one night. I guess he was pondering all these events that were going on in the world, and he felt the desire to want to write a song about the systemic racism that he was seeing, not only across the country but firsthand. And so that gave us A Change Is Gonna Come. Greg, do you have anything else before we jump into the lyrics?
No, not for this one.
Okay. Well, I actually really like this song. It's one of my favorite songs. The first verse, he talks about being born by a river in a little tent. More than likely referring to like the tent revivals and river baptisms that you hear or seen on TV maybe. Which this is the type of religious activity that Cooke would have certainly grown up with and perhaps experienced firsthand. But I think there's also an interesting take here. I mean, there's a possible reference to the River Jordan, which is the river that separates Israel and Jordan in the Middle East. Civil rights advocates over the years have often compared the state of Black people under Jim Crow to the Jews that were fleeing persecution in Egypt and Rome and the Old and New Testaments of the Bible. So I think there's a couple different references there as to how that line could be taken. I've always kind of thought of it more as the former, the kind of more literal interpretation, but I don't know. I can definitely see the figurative aspect.
I think the river thing is I think that's a stretch. I think it's more the first one, the tent baptisms and things like that. I think the second one's a little stretch.
There could also just be an aspect to it too of um, simplicity. I don't know. That's just me
Yeah,
thinking out
that
loud.
that might be
Um,
that's possible too. Not every lyric that someone writes in a song has like significant meaning.
yeah, I definitely think this is one line in the song that's in my mind definitely open to interpretation more so than others. But
Hmm.
um, anyway, but then he goes on to say that, like the river, he's been running ever since, and I think this is definitely a reference to throughout American history and the idea that Black people throughout history were fleeing to the north. Uh, you know, on a personal level, Cook and his family moved from Mississippi to Chicago when he was 2 years old. So he definitely has a personal connection to this idea of running. And then we get into the chorus for the first time, and he says it's been a long time coming, but he knows that change is going to come. And certainly, ever since the 17th century, I think it was trying to think back to my Virginia history days. I grew up in Virginia. I'm pretty sure the first slaves came to America in 1617, 1619, something like that. But ever since the 17th century, blacks in America have certainly been suppressed, and this was certainly prevalent and big in the news and throughout America in the 50s and 60s when Cook was writing this song. And like Bob Dylan's song "Blowing in the Wind" and Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, he's saying, he knows that there will be a day when whites and blacks are finally equal. Um, then he jumps into the second verse. It's been too hard to live in. Um, you know, racial segregation and discrimination was on everyone's mind during this time. And like many blacks who not only suffered physically during this time, Cook was likely struggling with these difficulties emotionally. He certainly, as we talked about in the part of the inspiration for writing the song, he experienced racism firsthand. And now this next part, I think there's actually two possible takes on it. When he says he's afraid to die because he doesn't know what's up there beyond the sky. One, I think it's possible that he's doubting his faith, which would be a further reference back to the first verse where we had the river reference and possible churches. And he says, I've been running ever since. Maybe this is a reflection back on that first verse where he's running from his faith. Maybe that's a different interpretation of that first verse. And so here in the second verse, when he says, I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. Maybe this is him questioning his faith and not sure if there's an afterlife. Maybe he's no longer believing in a God because of what he's seeing on earth. Or a possible second version interpretation of this line here could be that perhaps he may not want to die because he's afraid that discrimination and segregation exists in heaven. So maybe he thinks that it's actually better on earth. I think that's less likely. But there are some people that interpret it that way.
That is an interesting theory, though,
Yeah,
because one could think, I mean, if you're like a faithful person, one could think, well, if it's allowed to be down here like this, then why would it change up there?
yeah,
Since like if you're a person that believes in faith, like it's supposed to be the same. It should be the same,
or better.
or
Should
or better. Hopefully better. Hopefully better.
yeah, hopefully better.
But yeah, I could see that reasoning or thinking too.
Yeah, and I personally, I think the first one, because I do think it's a reflection back on the first verse, and I think that's kind of an underlying tone here. There's definitely, in my mind, there's definitely some faith undertones in his writing here.
Yes.
And then he goes back into the chorus again, about how change is going to come, and then we get into the third verse. Now, the third verse, interestingly enough, was actually edited out of the published version that was eventually released in December. Simply because the record label felt it spoke too boldly to segregation. It's a shorter verse, and he basically talks about trying to go to the movies downtown, but people tell him you don't want to hang around there. There's too much. It's too high risk due to the discrimination and possibility of violence that could occur. then again he goes into just trying to drive home this idea like this is the world we live in, but the chorus he believes that a change is going to come. Then the fourth verse, uh, and this was interesting. He talks about going to his brother asking for help, but he gets knocked back down on his knees. And I actually wasn't sure what he was getting at here, so this is one I actually looked up. Um, he's referring what he's referring to here is that there's many people in the civil rights movement that felt that men or blacks shouldn't fight back. That they should avoid conflict. They should avoid violence because they were afraid of the violence that could be taken out upon them and their families. And so here he's saying that we don't have full support across the board, and in many ways, the record producers that Cooke worked with did this to him. They were not really in favor of this song. They cut the third verse, um, partially because they were afraid that he would alienate his fans that were white, who were the ones that were really kind of a large percentage of his fan base at the time. So I think there's kind of a personal anecdote there that with this line.
Yeah, and you can definitely see that back then between like the conflict between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, because
Yeah,
Malcolm X was more toward the violent initially,
yeah,
more toward the violent end of it, whereas Martin Luther King was about just maintaining peace and not fighting back with violence because that makes you no better than them. So
yeah,
which one is right? I'm not going to say which one's right. Because if someone messes with you for so long, like how long do you keep peaceful for? But is it the right thing to be violent? I don't know. But there was that conflict, and I think
yeah,
everyone just needed to be on the same page rather than trying to fight each other.
yep, absolutely. And then at the end, I think he ends on a note of optimism here when he says that there are times when he didn't think he was going to make it, but he knows he can carry on. And then he dives back into the chorus one last time, knowing that change is going to come. And I like that he ends on a note of optimism here, and I think that note of optimism runs throughout the song. He keeps coming back to that chorus. I know a change is going to come. But in some sense, I think maybe he's trying to reconcile with himself internally. Is battling, this, he's trying to stay optimistic. He sees that there's others around him that are optimistic, but at the same time, he's seeing all these struggles and experiencing personal struggles. And sure enough, 10 months after this song was first released, I mean, he was shot and killed in LA, I think it was. So, he was a victim of fatal violence himself. And, it's just, I think I really interpret these lyrics as being optimistic, and they certainly became an anthem for the civil rights movement. We can talk a little bit about the legacy in a second. But I really think when he wrote this song, I really think he was trying to reconcile in his own mind what existed and what the future should be. And I kind of read that in the lyrics here. It's very well written. I just think it's, in my mind, it's one of the best written songs in history.
I know you brought it up for like kind of holding him back with the cutting of the third verse.
Mm-hmm.
Had he not been shot and able to make more music, I think that verse was better to get cut at the time. Just because of like if he loses his fan base or like anything like that, he can't be outspoken at all at that point.
Yeah, I mean that's
but from that perspective, like he needs to kind of choose and pick his battles so that he can essentially win the war type deal. Is it right? No, but at the time, I think that was something he kind of had to weigh.
Yeah, and I'm not. What I read made it seem like he didn't have a choice in the matter. But I'm not. I'm not. I mean, that was just one article. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
Perhaps maybe he ultimately ended up agreeing with the decision based on the reasoning presented. Um, it's hard to say, and we'll never know, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, but
Otherwise, good message from the song. But yeah, it is kind of a downer. I know you say it ends on a positive note, but like the whole premise of the song needing to get made is kind of a downer.
that's a fair point.
Yeah. Like
um,
it's
it,
like
it-
it's like so I've been sorry, this might be not even completely related at all, but I've been watching the Star Wars Clone Wars cartoon, and like the whole time, like there's all this hope throughout the whole show. But like at the very end, you know that all the Jedi die and Darth Vader exists. So like me, I'm thinking of it from like a realistic standpoint, like, oh man, this show is pretty good and there's all this hope in it. But the very last episode, you just know everyone's gonna die and it
yeah,
sucks. And I feel like that's kind of similar to this song. Like there's like hope in the song, but you have all these civil rights movements happening at the time, and it just sucks.
yeah, and it's a shame that um, Sam Cooke and Martin Luther King. I mean, it's a shame that all these civil rights leaders saw their lives ended so short. Um, given the strides that were made later in the '60s. Um, I mean, for that matter, John F. Kennedy too. You can throw him into the
Was
mix.
that was that
Um,
63?
yeah, Kennedy was shot in '63, November
Yeah,
'63.
man, a lot of stuff happened around this song.
Yeah, and then you had, I mean, at the same time, you could argue that because of that, that's the reason we got the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65. Who's to say what would have happened had these individuals not been shot and killed?
Yeah,
That we're trying to push for change. You know, it's I think eventually we would have seen that those bills would have been passed, but it
did
may
it
have
make him
taken.
longer?
Exactly. It may not have happened as quickly as it did, and more people would have suffered for it. So,
Yeah,
it's hard to say. I mean, you can speculate on alternate history all day long, um, but
why we
but
started
none.
off with the song for an alternate history.
Yeah, yeah. But nonetheless, the song, as I said, the song did become a rallying cry of sorts for the movement, and um, you know, Sam Cooke actually only ever performed the song once live. Performed it on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, February 7th, 1964, which unfortunately was overshadowed by the Beatles' performance on the Ed Sullivan Show 2 days later. so, so they had actually hoped that this was going to be a big song for him, and it just they couldn't get the marketing to kind of really take off on it, unfortunately, due to the overshadowing. And turns out Sam Cooke actually ended up not enjoying performing it, in an article I read, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then, as I said, he was shot and killed
it's, I mean,
in
it's probably
December.
not a fun song to perform.
Yeah,
Like,
it's kind of a slow song. It's not really upbeat.
no,
Um, but it is considered to be one of the best songs that he's ever wrote, um, or ever wrote, and it was voted number 12 on Rolling Stone's greatest songs of all time, and it's been selected for preservation in the Library of Congress with the National Recording Registry. So,
oh, nice.
um, yeah, so this is, I mean, it's clearly a well recognized song for not only the musicianship on it. Musically, it's actually a really nice song too. If you haven't heard it before, just listen to it. Not just for the lyrics, but the music. It's you've got some really nice strings in there, and it's very orchestral, I think, in many ways. Um, Probably how I would describe it. Interesting anecdote. I mentioned at the beginning how a big catalyst for why I wrote it was because of the incident at the hotel, which was in Shreveport, Louisiana. In 2019, the mayor of Shreveport I guess I'm saying that right. Shreveport. I've never been there, but anyway, in 2019, the mayor of the city at the time apologized to the Cooke family for the event that occurred and posthumously awarded him the key to the city, which I thought was kind of a cool way for the city um, to try to correct a wrong. And
And it's not like anyone probably asked for that. It was just
no, I'm
something that
sure
they
it was,
did.
yeah. So, but this is hands down one of my favorite songs. I think it's just so good, and um, lots of covers of the song. We actually saw my wife and I. We went to we live near Charlottesville, Virginia, and we managed to get tickets to the concert for Charlottesville that was held after um, the events there in 2017,
Okay.
and um, I remember, some great artists that performed it, but Justin Timberlake actually did a cover of this song in that concert, which was
Oh,
pretty
really?
cool, and I thought was kind of fitting. Yeah, that was how he opened up his set.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, but anyway, as I say, I like the song. I think one of the things I think is cool about both these songs is they're both drawing on Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech.
Yeah.
Which I
We
think
did not
is
plan that out.
no, we did not. So, but I think that just goes to show how influential Martin Luther King Jr. was on, you know, even with months after his speech to years after his speech, and just I
Yeah.
think that shows his lasting legacy that he's had on the movement that continues to this day.
Yeah.
So,
Well, Matt, did you have anything else to add for your song?
no, I mean, there's lots of other little facts out there, but we don't. It's one of those songs where we could go all day on. So,
Yeah, definitely. Well, I didn't have anything to add either. You wanna introduce next week's theme then?
yeah, sure. And we didn't even talk about this. I don't know if we're doing it next week or 2 weeks from now, but
Oh
sometime
yeah,
soon.
we'll just say next episode.
Next
I
episode.
think
There
we're
you
gonna
go.
try to move to just doing the bi-weekly thing, so it should be in 2 weeks from now. But if we get a chance to record something and pop it up next week, just be ready for it.
Be on the lookout. But yeah, so we're coming into the wedding season. It's springtime. So we are going to do wedding songs that you might do a first dance to, but we're just calling it wedding songs. So I am going to do the song that my wife and I did for our wedding day, which is I Choose You by Sarah Bareilles. Greg, what are you doing?
I'm gonna use my wedding day song, so this is our first dance, to Perfect by Ed Sheeran and Beyonce.
Awesome. Yeah, it's going to be
And
good.
it's gonna be great.
Wedding
Oh,
songs are always fun.
yeah, we also did like got a dance instructor we hired someone to give us a dance. So like
So
that
there's a
all of
video is
them.
what you're saying.
What was that?
There's a video is what you're saying.
There is a video. I don't think my wife will let me post it. So I did almost drop her though. But I'll leave that story for the next episode.
This sounds looking forward.
What was
All right.
that,
Thanks,
Matt?
everybody. I said thanks. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, before we go and depart, I would like to thank you for all listening. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Check us out on Facebook. Give us an email at recordmashup@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of the show, any changes you want, anything like that. You can also catch us on Apple, Apple iTunes, Google, whatever streaming service you use. So appreciate everyone tuning in. Have a good one.
Thanks, everybody.